The galaxy never noticed the moment humanity began to win. That was the point. When Earth first achieved faster-than-light travel, the galaxy's great powers, the Council of Nine, measured humanity's fleets, weapons, and industry. By every metric that mattered to them, humanity was unremarkable. Our warships were smaller, our colonies fewer, our economy a fraction of theirs, so they let us in. They welcomed us into the Interstellar Trade Charter, allowed us a seat at the table far from the head, and gave us observer status on military councils. To them, Earth was a quaint curiosity, a small blue world with polite diplomats and wide-eyed explorers. It was exactly the image we wanted. The first phase of the plan wasn't even recognized as a plan. Humans began offering services no one else valued enough to monopolize. Logistical coordination for joint ventures, translation between alien dialects, mediation in border disputes too minor for the Council's notice. We didn't sell weapons, we sold trust. The Dreven Mining Guild soon discovered that human freight captains could move cargo through disputed space without firing a shot. The Thalkiri learned that human negotiators could settle ancient blood feuds over territory with a handshake and a binding trade contract. Every time a human brokered peace, goods flowed faster, profits rose, and lives were spared. The Council's militaries didn't mind. They saw it as us doing the tedious work so they could focus on real power. They didn't see that we were quietly becoming the glue between their worlds. The second phase was education. Human universities began offering off-world scholarships, not for engineers or soldiers, but for storytellers, historians, and artists. Young leaders from alien species studied not just physics or economics, but how humans told stories about honor, justice, and unity. The graduates went home with human idioms in their languages and human values embedded in their decision-making. They still served their own worlds, but their thinking was subtly shifted. Soon, interstellar contracts were written in standard Terran legal code because it was clearer. Diplomatic treaties were signed on neutral human stations because no one else's ground felt fair. By the time the third phase began, no one could undo the first two. Human corporations managed the banking networks. Human arbitrators oversaw most interstellar courts. Even the timing of the Council's annual summit had been moved to align with Earth's calendar because it's easier that way. We didn't command fleets, we commanded the rhythm of the galaxy's daily life. And yet we had never declared war. One council elder, an Ovari named Kelsha, finally noticed. During a private meeting with Ambassador Jonathan Hale, she said, "You are not warriors, and yet your banners fly over every decision made here. How did you take the galaxy without firing a shot?" Hale only smiled. "We didn't take it, you gave it to us. All we did was make ourselves indispensable." Kelsha's expression tightened, but she said nothing. She knew it was true. Humanity's dominance was not written in conquests, but in the simple, undeniable truth. You can fight an enemy. You cannot fight the hand that keeps your world turning, your food arriving, your laws enforced, and your stories alive. The Council still called itself the ruling body of the galaxy. But every law passed, every deal signed, every alliance formed, bore the quiet fingerprints of Earth. And in the shadows, the next phase of the plan was already in motion. They called it the web, though no one outside human circles ever saw the strands. It began with trade routes. Not the obvious ones, those were heavily patrolled, mapped by the Council centuries before humanity joined. The real growth came in the neglected corridors, small, unstable warp lanes that most powers dismissed as too dangerous or economically unviable. Humans charted them, mapped every microsingularity, every gravitational drift, every seasonal warp fluctuation. Then they offered them not as territory but as a service. We'll move your goods, we'll keep them safe. You don't have to fight your neighbors for the safe lanes anymore. The first lesson we taught the galaxy, without announcing it, was that power was not always about holding ground. Sometimes it was about holding the map. From there, the web expanded into communications. Human engineers quietly developed translation algorithms capable of operating between over 1,000 known languages and dialects, including those so politically sensitive that council law prohibited direct exchanges. We didn't break the law. We just made sure every message passed through a Terran relay station for clarity. The stations did more than translate words. They adjusted tone, smoothed insults, reframed ultimatums into proposals. Wars that might have begun over mistranslations never happened because somewhere in a quiet room on Earth, a linguist decided that "we will cleanse your skies" should be rendered as "we will clear your skies." The second lesson: those who control the conversation control the future. History remembers wars, but it rarely remembers the hands that stopped them before they began. Humanity remembered. We had centuries of our own near extinctions, wars prevented not by generals, but by diplomats, traders, and even artists. We taught that history to our alien students in ways that were never called propaganda. A Thalkiri cadet might study Earth's age of sail and learn of how the British and Ottoman empires once traded while still rivals, discovering the delicate art of being both competitor and partner. A Drevan merchant would hear about Japan's Edo period, when peace was maintained through trade monopolies instead of conquest. The third lesson: the sword is loud, but the ledger endures. Of course, there were voices warning the council. A few elder species saw the pattern. One speech by Vurattle of the Zothan Assembly still circulates in political academies. "You see the humans as convenient mediators. I see them as the river. No one conquers the river, but all who drink from it live by its rules." The warning went unheeded. After all, humans never asked for planets, never demanded fleets, never claimed borders. We were simply useful. Ethically, humanity debated itself more fiercely than the galaxy did. Some Terran scholars feared we were creating a dependency that stripped other civilizations of their self-sufficiency. Others argued that influence without ownership was the most moral form of leadership. No bloodshed, no occupation, just cooperation by necessity. In quiet lecture halls on Luna, professors compared it to ancient Athens' rise, not by empire, but by culture and commerce. Some called it benevolent stewardship. Others called it empire in everything but name. But the truth was simpler. We had learned from history that war rarely changed hearts, only circumstances. And if humanity was to survive among species who saw us as a curiosity at best and a threat at worst, we could not afford to be just another conqueror. So we became something else. The teacher who could not be replaced. The bridge no one dared burn. The silent hand that turned the wheel of the galaxy, not for glory, but because it was safer for everyone if we held it. And beneath it all, the web grew tighter. The first crack in the illusion came from the Velar Dominion. The Velar were old even by council standards, a civilization of crystalline minds and fractal architecture, famous for their patience and infamous for their grudges. They had tolerated humanity's rise in the same way they tolerated a young river carving through their territory, an annoyance but slow enough to ignore. Until one day, it wasn't slow anymore. A trade dispute between the Velar and the Dreven Mining Guild erupted over a newly discovered Hyperium-rich asteroid belt. Normally, such disputes went through Terran arbitration, fast, fair, and most importantly, profitable for all sides. But this time the Velar refused. They declared that no Terran mediators would be allowed, no Terran trade codes used, and no Terran shipping firms contracted. To the Council, it was a minor procedural change. To us, it was a shot fired, without guns but aimed at the very arteries of the web. At first, the Velar's plan seemed clever. They redirected shipping through their own guild-controlled routes, employed their own translation corps, and pushed the Dreven into direct negotiations without Terran oversight. It lasted less than a month. Cargo went missing. Messages were mistranslated, not maliciously, but clumsily enough to turn polite refusals into insults. Payment delays spread through the interstellar credit network because, without Terran brokers, there was no unified exchange rate. By week 3, 3 separate minor wars had ignited along the Velar-Dreven corridor, not over the asteroid belt, but over lost shipments and broken contracts. The Dreven were the first to break. Their guildmaster sent a message directly to Earth's Ministry of Interstellar Commerce. "We don't care if we lose the asteroids. We can't lose the lanes. Fix this." The Velar, proud and stubborn, tried to hold out, but the ripple effect spread faster than they expected. Their allies, whose economies depended on Dreven shipments, turned on them, pressuring them to restore Terran oversight. By the end of the second month, the Velar capitulated. Terran trade codes were reinstated. Terran mediators returned. Terran shipping firms resumed control of the lanes. The asteroid belt was still under dispute, but the outcome no longer mattered. Everyone had seen the truth. Remove humanity from the equation, and the galaxy began to shake apart. In the Council's Grand Chamber during the formal restoration of Terran mediation rights, Ambassador Jonathan Hale addressed the Assembly. "You have called us opportunists. You have called us manipulators. Perhaps you are right, but tell me, what kind of galaxy collapses because one species steps aside? You speak of sovereignty, yet you cannot stand without our scaffolding. If that is a weakness, it is one we share. And if we share it, then we must also share the duty to protect it." No one responded. The silence was not agreement, it was recognition. Philosophers back on Earth debated the morality of the incident. Was it right for humanity to design a system so indispensable that removing us caused chaos? Or was it the galaxy's responsibility to avoid dependence? History offered no clear answer. Rome had built roads so vital that entire nations collapsed when they crumbled. The British Empire had once tied continents together with cables, ports, and legal codes, until the system was inherited, adapted, and transformed by those it once ruled. The lesson was uncomfortable. Influence without violence was still influence, and influence, no matter how benevolent, was still power. In the shadows, the web tightened further. The Velar incident had proven what some suspected but few dared to say aloud. The galaxy could survive without humanity's fleets, but without our connections, it would tear itself apart. And somewhere in the deep corridors of Earth's Strategic Advisory Council, a new question began to circulate. If one day the galaxy truly turned against us, would we be ready to let it collapse rather than surrender our place in it? They called it the Silent Siege. It began quietly, no declarations, no sanctions, no war fleets on the horizon, just a subtle withdrawal. One by one, the most powerful member states of the Council, Velar, Zothan, Cadril, even the cautious Lurasi, started shifting their logistics, arbitration, and communications away from Terran channels. Not all at once, not even in the same sectors, but in small, deliberate moves designed to be unremarkable. To the public, it was nothing. To us, it was a knife slowly pressing at the throat of the web. The Council had learned from the Velar's failed attempt. This time they didn't try to replace every strand at once. They targeted isolated nodes, small sectors of space where humanity's presence was minimal, redundant, or easily replaced. A remote freight corridor between Cadril mining colonies. Shift it to Lurasi carriers. A minor arbitration office on the rim. Close it quietly and redirect disputes to a council-certified tribunal. A translation hub for a low-traffic language cluster. Fund an indigenous translation cooperative to take over. Each cut was tiny, each loss barely noticeable. But the architects of the Silent Siege were patient. They knew if enough strands were severed, the web would eventually sag under its own weight. On Earth, the Strategic Advisory Council met in a windowless chamber deep beneath Geneva. The mood was neither panicked nor resigned, it was calculating. "They think they are starving us," said Minister Aisha Grant, her voice level. "But they don't realize the web was never just a network. It's a habit, and habits," she leaned forward, "are harder to break than laws." The plan she proposed was as radical as it was counterintuitive. We would let them cut the strands. Not resist, not protest. But every time a strand was cut, we would offer something better in its place free of charge. If they took away a Terran freight route, we would introduce a new, faster courier service nearby. If they shut down a Terran arbitration court, we would launch a cultural exchange council that resolved disputes informally. No fees, no politics. If they replaced a Terran translation hub, we would give away open-source translation AIs capable of twice the accuracy. It was a strategy borrowed from our own history. The way tech companies once offered free services until they became indispensable. The Silent Siege dragged on for years. From the outside, it looked like humanity was retreating, ceding ground in quiet shame. Our offices closed. Our logos vanished from trade lanes. The Council saw it as proof their strategy was working. But in the shadows, we were weaving something new. Our replacements weren't bound by Council regulations. They were faster, more efficient, and most importantly, voluntary. Alien traders and diplomats didn't just use our systems, they asked for them. They trusted them. They trusted us. What the Council failed to grasp was the fourth lesson. Control taken by force breeds resistance. Control given by choice breeds loyalty. The breaking point came with the Lurasi famine. A collapse in their agricultural dome network left millions on the brink of starvation. Council relief fleets were mired in bureaucracy, forms, quotas, debates over jurisdiction. Human couriers, acting entirely outside the official network, delivered food and medical supplies within days. No tariffs, no politics, no demands. When the Lurasi Prime Minister publicly thanked the Terran relief web before the Council, the chamber fell into a stunned silence. The siege had been broken, not by defiance but by generosity. Philosophers later called it the paradox of the siege. The attempt to dismantle our influence only made it stronger, because it forced us to evolve beyond the Council's framework entirely. From that moment, the web wasn't just an economic or diplomatic system, it was a lifeline, and no one, not even our enemies, could afford to sever it. In the ministry's sealed archives, Minister Grant recorded a single line for the future. "You cannot besiege the river. You can only drink from it or die of thirst." The summit was supposed to last 3 days. That was the agreement, 3 days of negotiations in neutral territory to resolve the structural tensions between humanity's web and the Council's traditional authority. It was to be held in the Arcadia Spire, a gleaming orbital station above the neutral moon of Pelion. Humanity agreed with one condition. The spire would be staffed and managed entirely by neutral parties, most of whom, coincidentally, were graduates of Terran diplomatic academies. The Council didn't notice the irony. From the moment the delegations arrived, it was clear 3 days wouldn't be enough. The Velar wanted protections against Terran monopolies. The Dreven wanted expanded access to Terran freight networks. The Lurasi demanded permanent relief agreements. The Zothan were still furious about cultural contamination in their border systems, while half their youth were already streaming Terran media through unregulated channels. The first day ended without a single agreement. The second day ended with 2 shouting matches and a walkout. By the third day, no one was even pretending to keep the schedule. It was the Lurasi Prime Minister who finally said what everyone was thinking. "We can't solve this in 3 days. We can't even solve this in 3 years." That was when Ambassador Jonathan Hale made his proposal. "Then don't leave." At first they thought he was joking, but Hale spoke with the calm certainty of a man laying the final stone in a bridge he'd been building for decades. "Make the Arcadia Spire permanent. Keep your delegations here, keep your ambassadors here, keep talking. Turn this summit into the table where the galaxy always sits, so that problems are solved before they become crises." It was a radical idea, but the exhaustion in the room was real. The wars of the last century had been devastating. The silent siege had proven that economic disruption could be just as destructive. A permanent table sounded almost merciful. By the end of the week, they voted to keep the summit going indefinitely. The implications were massive. For the first time in history, every major power kept a constant presence in the same station, under the same roof, speaking formally and informally every day. And who ran the spire, who provided its translation systems, its secure communications, its supply chains, its arbitration protocols? Humans. It wasn't by force. It wasn't even by decree. It was simply practicality. Terran systems were the only ones everyone trusted equally. Soon, the Arcadia Spire became more than a summit. It became the beating heart of interstellar politics. Philosophers compared it to the ancient Greek agora, the Renaissance coffee houses, the United Nations headquarters of the 21st century. Spaces where ideas and deals flowed so freely that even enemies found themselves in quiet, grudging cooperation. It became impossible to declare war without first walking past your rival's delegation in the Spire's central plaza. It became impossible to launch an embargo without facing the shared dining hall, where ambassadors from both sides would have to eat under the same glass dome. The fifth lesson emerged here. The most powerful battlefield is the one no one wants to leave. Years passed. Delegates came and went, but the spire endured. Even during crises, the lights never went out. The summit became less an event and more a state of existence. And in that slow, constant conversation, The web became not just an economic and diplomatic system, but the cultural center of the galaxy. Historians would one day write that the council kept its name, but the Arcadia Spire became the true seat of power. And the key to that seat, quietly and without ceremony, rested in Terran hands. It began with music. The first time a Zothan youth orchestra played Beethoven's Ninth in the Arcadia Spire's Great Hall, even the most hardened council delegates stayed to listen. They didn't understand every lyric, but the chorus carried something older than words, a sense of shared triumph, of a horizon worth reaching together. Art bypassed politics. You could argue with treaties. You couldn't argue with the way a melody stayed in your mind for weeks. Soon it wasn't just music. The Spire's archives filled with Terran literature translated into hundreds of alien languages. Shakespeare's tragedies found audiences among the Thalkiri, who saw in them reflections of their own warrior epics. African oral histories resonated with the nomadic Drevan, who began preserving their own stories with the same narrative structures. Terran art didn't replace native traditions. It blended with them, reshaping and being reshaped. A Cadril playwright reimagined Macbeth as a cautionary tale set on a molten world. A Velar poet adapted Terran haiku into crystalline light sculptures. It was the slowest kind of conquest, one no one resisted because it didn't demand surrender, only participation. Education followed naturally. The Terran Cultural Exchange Program, originally just a scholarship fund, expanded into a network of academies scattered across every major sector. Enrollment was voluntary and tuition was free. The only requirement was that students study both their own history and the histories of at least 3 other species. The hidden genius was in the curriculum. Every course, no matter the subject, carried within it Terran values, critical thinking, empathy, the idea that power was legitimate only when it served the many. Within a generation, graduates of Terran academies held positions in trade guilds, planetary councils, even rival militaries. They didn't see themselves as Terrans, but when they thought about justice, law, or diplomacy, they thought in ways humanity had taught them. Some called it cultural imperialism. Even within Earth's own universities, there were fierce debates. Were we enriching the galaxy or homogenizing it? Were we building unity or erasing difference? Ambassador Hale addressed the criticism once, in a lecture that would later be replayed in political philosophy courses across 100 worlds. Every culture changes when it meets another. The question is not whether change will happen. It will. The question is whether the change makes us less able to live together or more. We chose more. The turning point came during the Lurasi crisis of 2238. The Lurasi military, long hostile to Terran influence, mobilized to seize an unclaimed moon rich in biocrystals. The operation should have been swift and decisive. Instead, the fleet commander halted mid-mission after receiving a single transmission. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even from Earth. It was a speech from one of his own junior officers, a graduate of the Terran Academy on Pelion, reminding him that the moon's native ecosystem was a rare, self-sustaining biosphere, and that destroying it for resources would violate the Lurasi's own charter. The commander stood down. No Terran official had lifted a finger. The 6th lesson was whispered in political backrooms. The most enduring conquest is the one that makes your enemies defend your values as their own. By then, the web was no longer just infrastructure. It was a shared identity. You could live your entire life in the galaxy without ever visiting Earth, yet still think in the rhythm of Terran idioms, still celebrate Terran holidays alongside your own, still quote Terran philosophers without realizing their origin. And all of it had happened without a single battle line drawn. It began with a single explosion. A Dreven freight station in the Nurith corridor, one of the most heavily trafficked arteries of the web, vanished in a white flash, taking with it 12 freighters, 300 crew and cargo bound for 6 different worlds. Within hours, the council chambers were a storm of accusations. The Cadril blamed the Lurasi. The Lurasi blamed the Dreven. The Dreven pointed to a Terran lapse in security protocols. The evidence was thin, the rhetoric sharp, and the fleets began to move. For decades, humanity had been the quiet spine of stability. We stopped wars before they started, not by force but by making war impractical. But the Nurith corridor disaster cut deeper. It wasn't just an attack on a trade station. It was an attack on trust. The Council called for an emergency session, not in the Arcadia Spire, but on Velar Prime under their control. The message was clear. Humanity would not be hosting this crisis. Ambassador Jonathan Hale knew the danger. Without the Spire's informal channels, the dinners, the chance hallway conversations, anger would calcify. The Council's formal chamber on Velar Prime was a place of speeches, not dialogue, and speeches could start wars. On the journey to Velar Prime, Hale addressed his staff in the dimly lit conference cabin of the Terran flagship Unity's Reach. "They're going to try to pin this on someone before the day is done," he said. "If they succeed, we're looking at the first full-scale interstellar war in 60 years. One aide asked the obvious, what if they try to pin it on us? Hale didn't flinch. Then we remind them that wars are fought with ships but won or lost on supply lines, and we own those. The first day on Velar Prime was chaos. The Dreven presented fragmented sensor data they claimed proved a Lurasi warship had been in the vicinity. The Lurasi countered with logs showing the same ship docked in their own orbital yards at the time. The Velar proposed immediate sanctions, effectively cutting the Lurasi out of the web. It was exactly the kind of fracture the silent siege had once aimed for. This time, though, humanity didn't argue. We offered a gift. In the middle of the second session, Hale rose and projected a full reconstruction of the Nurith corridor, compiled from thousands of private navigational logs, courier transponders, and deep scan archives. Data the Council didn't even know we had. He didn't accuse. He didn't absolve. He simply laid out the truth. The explosion hadn't been caused by a warship or sabotage. It had been triggered by a micro-warp instability, a rare and catastrophic collapse in the local space-time lattice. The cause was natural. The tragedy was preventable. And then he said the line that would be replayed across the galaxy for decades. "The web is not just ours, it's yours. But if you tear it apart with blame and blood, you will have nothing left to hold you when the next storm comes." The chamber was silent. Even the Velar, who had wanted a target to punish, found themselves unwilling to ignite a war over an accident. The fleet stood down. Sanctions were shelved. But something more important had happened. In proving we could stop a war without taking sides, humanity had reinforced the unspoken truth. We were the galaxy's safety net. Remove us and every slip became a fall. Historians later debated whether the Nurith crisis had been a genuine accident or an engineered test. Some suspected certain council factions had hoped to expose the web as fragile under pressure. If so, they had failed spectacularly. The seventh lesson emerged here. The ultimate test of power is not how you wield it when you are attacked, but how you hold it when everyone else is ready to burn the world. After Velar Prime, no one seriously talked about dismantling the web again. And quietly in the Ministry's archives, Hale recorded a new contingency plan, not for war but for the possibility that one day the galaxy might grow too dependent on us to function. It was a plan no one hoped to use, but everyone knew we might need. By the end of the century, no one remembered a galaxy without the web. Trade disputes no longer sparked blockades. They were settled over coffee in the Arcadia Spire's sunlit atriums. Rival fleets still existed, but they sailed more for ceremony than for war. Even the most fractious border worlds had learned to speak through the web before they reached for weapons. It was the dream humanity had quietly built for generations: peace without submission, unity without conquest. And yet, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs was uneasy. The fear wasn't of rebellion, it was of dependence. In the secure chamber beneath Geneva, Minister Aisha Grant faced a table of Terran leaders and foreign observers. On the wall, a holographic projection mapped the web. Tens of thousands of lanes, arbitration hubs, cultural academies, relief corridors, and communication arrays, all converging back to Earth. This, she said, is stability, and it is also a chokehold. No one disagreed, everyone understood. If humanity chose to withdraw, if we shut down our hubs, pulled our couriers, or even slowed the flow, the galaxy would fracture in weeks. Power like this, Grant continued, is not meant to be permanent, not in one species' hands, not in ours. The debate was fierce. Some argued the web should remain fully under Terran control, a safeguard against the galaxy's old chaos. Others feared that keeping such a monopoly, even with good intentions, would eventually corrupt us. It was Ambassador Hale, older now, his hair gone to silver, who proposed a path between the extremes. Teach them to weave. Not dismantle the web, but train every member of the council to maintain their own segments, to become co-owners rather than mere users. Over decades, control would shift from a Terran monopoly to a shared stewardship. It was the most dangerous thing we had ever suggested, because it risked ending the very power that had kept us safe. The transition began quietly. Terran academies doubled their focus on infrastructure management. Courier routes were co-staffed with alien crews. Arbitration protocols were rewritten in shared code that anyone could audit. Some in the council suspected a trick, but as years passed, they realized the web wasn't weakening. It was growing stronger, because those who had once been customers were now custodians. And yet, no matter how much ownership was shared, Earth remained the heart, not because of treaties or technology, but because the web had been born in our hands, and the values woven into its strands could not be unwoven. The final moment came when the Cadral sector suffered a hyperflare that severed all comms for weeks. In the past, Terran couriers would have restored the links. This time, it was the Dreven, using systems they had learned from us, who repaired the breach. When the connection returned, a message flashed across the entire web, origin unknown, translated into every tongue. The web holds because we hold it together. Some historians say it was written by a Terran. Others believe it came from a Dreven technician. It didn't matter. The authorship had become irrelevant. The idea now belonged to everyone. In the archives of the Arcadia Spire, beneath the central plaza where delegates still crossed paths each day, there is a single plaque. No names, no dates, just a sentence carved into polished black stone. You cannot conquer the stars without war, but you can hold them if you choose never to let go of each other. It is the last lesson, and perhaps the only one that matters, that the truest victory is not in ruling the galaxy, but in making sure it never needs ruling at all.